Welcome to VSOW.
It's good to be here.
We are launching into a deep dive today on what I can only describe as a towering stack of source material.
That's a good way to put it. We have articles, legal analyses, these huge strategic blueprints, even internal memos.
And they all collectively define, or maybe redefine, the boundaries of political power and accountability in the United States right now.
Absolutely.
So our mission today is to really scrutinize these sources. We want to navigate this world, which is just so dense with data, and extract the clearest possible briefing on the integrity of our governing institutions.
And we want you, the listener, to walk away with a really thorough understanding of the biggest drivers shaping the current political landscape.
It's a consequential body of research we've compiled.
It really is. I mean, it spans from the absolute highest echelons of judicial review. We're talking about the Supreme Court's recent decision on presidential immunity, all the way down to a granular operational plan for restructuring administrative policy.
You're talking about Project 2025.
Exactly. The blueprint famously captured in Project 2025. And critically, we also have material that details the mechanisms of accountability.
Right, which is the other side of the coin.
It is. Both in the information ecosystem, we'll be looking at some documented media controversies, and of course, in the legal arena, where we're seeing real consequences being enforced for high-profile individuals.
And what's truly fascinating looking through all this is how developments in these three, seemingly disparate areas, law, political strategy, and media.
They're not disparate at all.
Not at all. They're completely interconnected. Each one is either reinforcing or challenging the others. So our goal is to extract those core insights and those connections, providing you with the context to understand this exceptionally fast-moving terrain.
And we'll structure our discussion methodically. So first, we'll focus on the legal and ethical framework. We're going to analyze that recent Supreme Court immunity ruling and then juxtapose it with the ethics controversies that are facing the judiciary itself.
From the executive to the judicial.
Exactly. Second, we'll do an intensive exploration of the Project 2025 strategic plan, focusing heavily on its philosophical foundation in the highly controversial unitary executive theory.
And finally,
we will examine accountability in both the information economy, looking closely at Fox News's documented internal dynamics, and in the legal system, which is really exemplified by the professional disbarment of a key figure.
This will be analytical, it will be detailed, and it will be focused solely on reporting the content, the implications, and the connections that we found within the source materials we've reviewed.
That's the mission.
So let's jump directly into the highest reaches of the legal world, defining the boundaries of executive and judicial power. We have to start with what is, I think, a truly seismic legal event.
No question.
On July 1st, 2024, the Supreme Court issued a defining 6-3 divided opinion in Trump v. United States.
And this ruling addressed, for the very first time in American history, the existence and the scope of a constitutionally based presidential immunity from criminal prosecution.
For official acts. That qualifier is so important.
It's everything. But this isn't just a major political story. This is, you could argue, a fundamental redefinition of the presidency itself.
So the majority opinion, which was authored by Chief Justice Roberts, didn't just find that some immunity exists, it went deeper. It rooted its argument in something the sources call presidential exceptionalism.
That's the core philosophy right there. The idea is that the president holds powers of, and I'm quoting here, unrivaled gravity and breadth.
And the logic is that if a president had to constantly operate under they call it a pall of potential prosecution, they would act with caution, with restraint.
Right, and that would undermine the energy and the vigor that the framers supposedly intended for the office.
Yeah.
So the court concluded that to safeguard the independence of the executive branch, you require a degree of immunity.
But doesn't that immediately run up against the core American principle that no one is above the law? How did the court try to balance the need for a vigorous executive with the demands of, criminal accountability?
That tension is exactly what the ruling attempts to resolve. And the sources show just how complex that resolution is. The court basically concluded that accountability is preserved, but through two very specific non-judicial mechanisms.
Okay, so not through the courts. What are they?
Elections and, crucially, impeachment. The idea is if a president is impeached by the House and then convicted by the Senate, then they can be subjected to criminal prosecution.
But without that specific political process, the judiciary's hands are tied.
For their official acts, yes. the judiciary cannot act against the president.
Okay, let's unpack the specific framework the majority established, because it's not just a blanket immunity.
No, it's not one size fits all. The source is detailed as three-tiered structure, and it's based entirely on the type of act performed.
All right, walk us through Tier 1. This is the highest level of protection.
Tier 1 provides absolute immunity for exclusive powers. This is for acts that fall entirely within the president's exclusive constitutional authority.
So, powers that only the president can exercise.
Exactly. And the court determined that Congress may not criminalize these specific actions, which means the judiciary can't adjudicate a criminal prosecution that even examines them.
So, what specific powers did the court cite as being so exclusive?
The examples are highly significant because they relate directly to the underlying case against the former president. The court cited the pardon power, the power to remove subordinate executive branch officials, the power to recognize foreign nations, and, critically for this case, the investigation and prosecution of crimes.
The investigation and prosecution of crimes. Okay, so if we apply that to the allegations against the former president, what was the immediate concrete impact on the charges he was facing?
Well, the ruling dictated that he is now absolutely immune from prosecution for any alleged conduct involving his discussions with Justice Department officials.
Because those discussions fall under that exclusive power.
Precisely. Because they touched directly upon the investigation and prosecution of crimes, which the court just deemed an exclusive constitutional function of the executive. So that specific subset of the indictment is now completely shielded from judicial review.
That is an immense shield. It essentially says that for certain core functions, the criminal system cannot touch the president.
And the only check is the political system of impeachment.
Okay. Now, moving to the middle ground, Tier 2, what protection is afforded to official acts that don't quite rise to that level of exclusive power?
This is Tier 2, which establishes presumptive immunity for other official acts. And this is really the broadest category. It covers actions that fall within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility, but are not, manifestly or palpably beyond the president's authority.
That sounds incredibly broad. Outer perimeter could mean a lot of things.
It's expansive. It covers not just exercising statutory powers, but also things like speaking to on behalf of the American people, or using the bully pulpit to persuade Americans. The majority explicitly noted that most of a president's public communications are likely to fall comfortably within this umbrella.
Wow. So a vast amount of activity is now presumed to be immune. How can a prosecutor even overcome that presumption?
The burden is very high. The prosecution has to rebut that presumption by demonstrating that enforcing the criminal law in that specific instance would pose no dangers of intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive branch.
Which sounds very difficult to prove.
It's a crucial, fact-intensive step. And the court applied this to that key allegation, right? That the former president pressured the vice president to decertify the 2020 election.
So how did that fit into the framework?
The court categorized presidential VP discussions on official duties as official conduct, which means that conduct now falls under presumptive immunity under Tier 2. Whether the presumption is ultimately rebutted, well, that has to be decided by the trial court, but following this new framework.
It's a significant departure from how we usually treat the actions of other government officials. Our source material points out a contrast here with Congress.
It's an excellent point for context. Members of Congress get immunity through the Constitution's speech or debate clause, but that protection is limited only to legislative acts.
Things like voting or debating on the floor.
Right, actions that are an integral part of the deliberative and communicative processes. The Supreme Court has repeatedly said that a member's communication with the public, even on important national issues, does not count as a legislative act and is therefore not immune.
But the president's public communications now get this presumptive immunity.
A vast swath of them, yes. This really underscores that exceptionalism the sources describe. It carves out a special status for the president that no other official has.
Okay, so finally, let's cover the actions that are clearly unprotected. Personal, unofficial conduct. That's Tier 3.
Tier 3 provides no immunity for unofficial acts. If the action isn't required for the functioning of the office, the court used the example of speaking as a candidate for office or party leader, then there is no protection.
But it's not that simple, is it?
Now, this is where the complexity truly compounds, because the court placed two crucial limits on how even these unofficial acts can be prosecuted.
And these are the limits that make applying the ruling so challenging in the real world.
Absolutely. First, Courts are not allowed to inquire into the president's motives. You can't prosecute an official act by claiming the president had a bad intention because that would supposedly chill their decision-making.
In the second limit.
Second, courts may not deem an action unofficial merely because it allegedly violates a generally applicable law. Just because it's illegal doesn't automatically make it unofficial.
So let's go deeper into that. If a prosecution is only targeting the unofficial act, say, a conspiracy, how does this ruling limit the evidence a prosecutor can use?
This is the most challenging part, so let's use a clear example from the analysis. Imagine a criminal prosecution for bribery, where the bribe was given to influence an official act.
Okay.
The court said prosecutors could point to the public record of that official act and what the president demanded in exchange for it. But here's the critical limitation. They could not admit testimony or private records of the president or his advisors probing the official act itself.
Wait. If the official act is the subject of the bribery, how do you prove the bribery without examining the details of the official act?
That is the core legal riddle created by this framework. It's a huge problem for prosecutors. The court's intent is to prevent the criminal trial from turning into a review of the president's governmental decisions.
So if the president's emails or memos about the decision are deemed evidence, that crosses a line.
That's the argument, that this itself creates the pall of prosecution the court wanted to avoid. So the trial court now has to conduct this fact-specific and extensive assessment to determine, element by element, what evidence probes the official act too closely and must be excluded from the jury.
Which means every pending case, the New York trial, the Georgia case, the Florida classified documents case, all of them are going to face massive procedural delays.
Massive.
Yeah.
Judges have to apply this new filter to everything. For instance, in the Florida case, the former president has already argued that the charges stem directly from official acts, like designating records as personal.
And if a judge accepts that argument,
He would get presumptive immunity there, too. This single ruling ensures a protracted legal battle over the very nature of every single presidential action in question.
and that legal battle means the time it takes to resolve these charges just expands dramatically.
It does. The court's focus on preserving the vigor of the presidency may maybe inadvertently preserve the defendant's ability to delay trials through extensive pretrial motions, which fundamentally alters the whole timeline of accountability.
All right, let's pivot. From the institution that is defining executive power to the integrity of that very institution, the judiciary.
A fascinating and necessary transition.
We're turning to the detailed ethics controversies surrounding Justice Clarence Thomas and his spouse, Ginny Thomas, and it's a remarkable shift. We go from a ruling that strengthens the executive's immunity to serious concerns about a total lack of accountability within the Supreme Court.
And what stands out immediately, and what critics in our sources really emphasize, is the structural problem. The Supreme Court operates without a required, enforceable code of ethics.
Which is just wild when you think about it.
It is. Unlike every other federal judge, and really almost any other public servant, the justices essentially decide for themselves whether or not to recuse themselves or whether their conduct warrants resignation.
The sources note that behavior that would get you fired or lose your security clearance in almost any other government job just goes unchecked at this highest level.
Entirely unchecked.
So let's detail the specifics of the allegations around Justice Thomas, focusing on the substantial gifts and financial benefits the sources describe.
The central recurring issue revolves around the long-term receipt of luxury vacations, significant financial gifts, and real estate transactions from wealthy benefactors, primarily the Republican donor Harlan Crow.
And critics have not minced words about this.
No, they've characterized this behavior as the flagrant taking of bribes in the form of these lavish trips. The scale of the benefits is just staggering. The sources detail him accepting luxury vacations on private jets, super yachts, stays at private resorts.
I read one source said the cost of a single dinner could equal several months' salary for the judge.
That's the kind of wealth we're talking about. And the public scrutiny really amplified when these financial transactions were found to extend to his family.
Right, to his extended family. And using some very specific disclosure rules to avoid reporting.
That's a crucial detail. The sources highlighted payments involving a grandnephew whom Justice Thomas was raising. The original ethics rules were very specific about covering direct family members, spouses, dependent children.
But a grandnephew is a loophole.
Critics argue it was a loophole that was exploited. The payments involved tuition, property transactions, and they were structured in a way that seemingly bypassed the required financial disclosure rules. We're talking about a total flow of potentially undeclared money in the tens of thousands of dollars.
And the analysis we have ties these ethical lapses directly to ideological and political networks.
It does. The whole situation is often framed by critics as the judiciary being systematically, bought by conservative legal
The
organizations.
Federalist Society is mentioned.
Yes, a key player in advocating for conservative judicial appointments. This sources note its founders have been involved in some of the same luxury trips with Thomas and Crow. And this suggests, according to critics, a highly effective network dedicated to cultivating access and influence with the nation's highest judges.
Okay, now shifting to the political activism of his spouse, Jeannie Thomas. The source material documents her deep involvement in promoting some really extreme election conspiracy theories.
Her actions and her public comments have raised severe questions about impartiality and neutrality on the court.
What specific comments raised the most alarm regarding the potential for political influence on the bench?
The sources cite some really shocking comments attributed to her. This includes her belief that the, and I'm quoting directly, Biden crime family and ballot fraud co-conspirators are being arrested and detained for ballot fraud right now and over coming days, and will be living in barges off GTMO to face military tribunals for sedition.
That specific language mass arrest, military detention, tribunals for political opponents, that is extremely inflammatory.
It speaks to a deep ideological commitment to some very radical theories about the 2020 election. She also expressed concern after the January 6 events, stating that those who attack the Capitol are not representative of our great teams of patriots for DJT.
And she was looking for advice on how to continue the fight.
Yes, she noted that many patriots were disgusted with the VP, meaning Pence, and were seeking advice on how to continue the fight to overturn the results.
And the response to these ongoing scandals really provides a clear illustration of the partisan divide when it comes to accountability in the judiciary.
Absolutely. The perception of accountability seems to be entirely partisan. Critics contend that if similar ethics scandals, undisclosed wealth, luxury gifts, extremist political activism, if all that were tied to liberal justices, impeachment hearings would already be underway.
So the fact that Justice Thomas remains on the court is seen as proof of a double standard.
By many, yes. It's interpreted as proof that the conservative majority and Republican leadership see reining in these ethics issues as politically undesirable, which just underscores the deep political nature of oversight at the highest court.
So we've established this foundational paradox. The Supreme Court issues a sweeping ruling that grants the executive branch exceptional legal immunity, while at the same time the integrity of the court itself is under severe scrutiny because of its own lack of ethical boundaries.
The legal power is being defined, but the ethical foundation is actively being questioned.
Let's transition now from the definition of legal power to the strategy for actually operationalizing it.
The playbook.
The playbook. We're diving into Project 2025, or the 2025 Presidential Transition Project. It's a comprehensive initiative spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation.
And established with a reported budget of $22 million, specifically to provide this detailed blueprint for reshaping the entire federal government during the next conservative presidential administration.
The sources describe Project 2025 as just unprecedented in its scope and ambition.
It is. It's not just a policy wish list. It is a full transition guide. It includes the mandate for leadership, which is the policy document, a massive personnel database for recruitment, and a draft set of executive orders ready for day one implementation.
And the sheer scale was apparently driven by specific complaints from the former president.
Exactly, from his first term about having terrible staff who, in his view, lacked ideological commitment.
So what is the single core philosophical mechanism that's driving this ambitious centralization of power in Project 2025?
The entire edifice, everything, rests on the highly controversial legal principle known as the unitary executive theory.
A theory championed by conservative legal scholars for decades.
Right, and it argues that the Constitution grants the president total, exclusive control over the entire executive branch.
That seems to fly in the face of the checks and balances designed into the system. I mean, how do proponents of this theory justify such expansive control?
Well, proponents argue that the current federal bureaucracy, which they often characterize as an unaccountable liberal bureaucracy, or the deep state, has usurped authority and now operates independently of the elected president.
So the theory is a corrective.
They claim the unitary executive theory is necessary to restore constitutional balance. to ensure that all 2 million+ federal employees answer directly to the chief executive. By consolidating control, the president can ensure policy implementation aligns strictly with his goals, circumventing any congressional or bureaucratic resistance.
And this centralization is explicitly designed to dismantle the independence of some major regulatory and enforcement agencies. Which agencies are being targeted for this consolidation of control?
The plan targets some of the most influential agencies that currently operate with a degree of independence. So we're talking about the Department of Justice, the DOJ, the FBI, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, and the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC.
So the goal is to strip away their semi-independent structures.
And place all personnel, all actions, and all decisions entirely under the president's command.
And the sources note that the Project 2025 blueprint plans to achieve this goal largely through executive orders, leveraging the current Supreme Court majority.
Precisely. They are banking on the legal environment created by a conservative Supreme Court, which has already shown an inclination to embrace a stronger unitary executive vision.
So they can avoid Congress.
It allows the plan to prioritize executive orders and regulatory actions, avoiding that messy, slow process of getting legislation through Congress as the primary mechanism for transformation.
Given this mandate for complete control, the most important operational aspect of Project 2025 isn't really the policy, it's the personnel.
Personnel is policy. That's the principle.
So how does the plan intend to replace the existing federal workforce with staff who are loyal to the agenda?
This is the operational core. The plan calls for replacing merit-based federal civil service workers, we could be talking about tens of thousands of them, with staff loyal to the next conservative president and who adhere to the America First agenda.
But how do they actually plan to execute such a mass replacement? Civil service protections are historically pretty robust.
The mechanism is a reclassification of positions. It's often referred to as Schedule F.
Schedule F.
This would reclassify a vast number of positions, potentially up to 50,000 workers, from competitive, merit-based civil service roles to policy-determining, policy-making, or policy-advocating roles.
And once they're reclassified,
they lose most civil service protections. It makes them immediately vulnerable to being fired and replaced with ideological loyalists.
And how is this loyalty specifically screened during the recruitment phase?
The project manages this through a massive, ideologically driven personnel database. Potential recruits have to complete a detailed questionnaire that screens for adherence to the Project 2025 agenda. The goal is to have around 20,000 potential staffers in that database by the end of 2024.
And there's a parallel effort, right?
Yes. The sources detail that a complementary conservative opposition research group, the American Accountability Foundation, is running a parallel initiative called Project Sovereignty 2025.
And what do?
They research high-ranking civil servants and publish the names of those perceived to be hostile to the agenda. This effort has been characterized by some critics as a kind of McCarthyite approach to personnel vetting.
We should pause for a second on the connection to the former president, because despite his public claims of ignorance, the source material confirms a significant alignment.
That's correct. He has publicly claimed to know nothing and dismissed some of the ideas as absolutely ridiculous, but the organizational ties are very deep. The goals of Project 2025 align explicitly with his Agenda 47 program.
And the people involved.
Over 200 former officials from his administration are now employed by Project 2025 partners. 6 of his former cabinet secretaries are authors or contributors to the mandate itself.
And the project director confirmed the link.
He did. Paul Dans, the Project 2025 director, confirmed ongoing collaboration, noting they often supply ideas and ultimately we hope to offer personnel suggestions to the campaign. So the denial appears to be largely rhetorical, given the deep operational ties.
Let's turn now to the concrete policy landscape proposed within the mandate for leadership. Starting with government restructuring, what are some of the most dramatic proposals for dismantling or reorganizing current federal agencies?
Well, the blueprint advocates for dismantling 2 major executive departments, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and the Department of Education.
Just dismantling them entirely.
The plan views them as overgrown and inefficient. Furthermore, there's a specific proposal to defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the CPB.
Why them?
The mandate dismisses it as, quote, $500 million squandered on leftist opinion each year, positioning it as an ideological target rather than a public service.
The section on immigration policy is described in the sources as massive, requiring a national effort akin to a historic engineering project.
The scale is described as rivaling the complexity of building the Panama Canal by former Trump advisor Stephen Miller. It's huge.
So what are the logistics of this proposed mass deportation and enforcement strategy?
The blueprint advocates for the mass arrest, detention, and deportation of illegal immigrants. The logistics involve using the power of the presidency to deputize the National Guard in sympathetic red states, placing them under federal command as immigration enforcement officers.
And not just at the border.
Critically, no. The plan advocates for deploying these units not just along the border, but potentially into so-called sanctuary cities and blue states that refuse to comply with federal immigration priorities.
And the plan proposes a method of coercion for states that resist.
That's the strategic leverage point. Project 2025 proposes withholding federal disaster relief funds, the funds dispensed by FEMA from state and local governments that refuse to abide by federal immigration laws.
So using essential aid as a tool of political control.
That's how critics frame it, yes. Moving beyond traditional enforcement to something much more coercive.
Now, concerning law enforcement and military powers, how would Project 2025 fundamentally change the relationship between the presidency and, say, the Justice Department?
The goal is total presidential control. The plan calls for making the FBI and the Department of Justice directly accountable to the president, effectively turning the Attorney General into a personal counsel to the president rather than the independent head of an enforcement department.
The blueprint also calls for expanded use of the Insurrection Act.
Yes, which would allow the president to deploy the U.S. Armed Forces for domestic law enforcement purposes.
A dangerous militarization of domestic law enforcement, some would say.
That's the argument from critics, that it dissolves the traditional separation between the military and civilian legal systems. And I should add, the plan also specifically advocates for combating what it terms anti-white racism, citing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as the legal basis for targeting what proponents view as discriminatory DEI or affirmative action policies.
Let's delve deeper into those social and cultural policies because they represent a major focus of the mandate.
A huge focus. The cultural shift is pervasive throughout the entire blueprint. A primary goal is the systematic elimination of protections against discrimination based on sexual or gender identity, and the complete removal of diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI programs from federal legislation and government agencies.
The language used in the mandate to describe DEI is particularly pointed. It calls it state-sanctioned racism.
It does. And the legal argument behind that characterization is that proponents within the project argue that DEI programs themselves constitute illegal discrimination based on race or identity, thereby violating the Equal Protection Clause and federal anti-discrimination laws.
So they would use the DOJ to go after these programs.
The plan proposes that the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, under the new administration, would be instructed to prosecute all state and local governments, institutions of higher education, corporations, and any other private employers maintaining DEI or affirmative action programs,
treating them as illegal discrimination cases. And beyond eliminating those programs, the mandate also promotes a very specific definition of the family structure.
Yes, it explicitly advocates for the government to maintain a biblically based, social science-reinforced definition of marriage and family. It's part of a broader effort to align federal policy with traditional conservative social values.
Finally, what are the most significant proposals regarding reproductive health policy, especially concerning access to medication?
The plan frames abortion as not being health care and promotes policies that support American health from conception to natural death. This includes specific, actionable proposals,
Such as
eliminating federal coverage and access to emergency contraception, or Plan B, which the mandate categorizes as an abortifacient. And, crucially, it also advocates for using existing federal law, like the Comstock Act, to criminalize the sending and receiving of abortion and birth control medications through the mail system.
So when we look at this entire document, from Schedule F to restructuring law enforcement and the federal government, what is the overall conclusion drawn by analysts and critics in our sources?
The conclusion is stark, and it is consistent. Critics widely characterize Project 2025 as an authoritarian Christian nationalist plan designed to fundamentally alter the U.S. system of government, leading the country toward autocracy. Legal experts argue that implementation would systematically undermine the rule of law, the separation of powers, and civil liberties.
There's a quote from Rachel Beatty Riedel, a political scientist at Cornell.
Yes, she noted that if fully implemented, the project would result in a dramatic decrease in American citizens' ability to engage in public life based on the kind of principles of liberty, freedom, and representation that are accorded in a democracy.
And even a former deputy attorney general under George H.W. Bush, Donald Ayer, weighed in.
He did. He concluded that the project seems to be full of a whole array of ideas that are designed to let Donald Trump function as a dictator by completely eviscerating many of the restraints built into our system.
And crucially, the sources confirm this is not just a hypothetical plan sitting on a shelf.
No, this is what matters most for you, the listener. Analysis of early executive actions by the subsequent administration found that nearly two-thirds of them mirror or partially mirror the proposals in the mandate.
So things were implemented immediately.
Immediate implementation of federal hiring freezes, rollbacks of gender identity policies, the removal of DEI programs, foreign aid freezes. Paul Dans, the Project 2025 director, expressed clear satisfaction, confirming that a pre-planned playbook was being rapidly enacted.
So we established the foundation. A legal ruling granting unprecedented executive immunity, coupled with a strategic blueprint Project 2025 designed to operationalize that power. The legal framework for power is set. But the next question is, what happens when that power is challenged?
Which brings us to accountability.
Exactly. We must turn now to accountability in the information and legal arenas. The expansive immunity ruling and the ambitious agenda of Project 2025, they both exist within a fractured media and environment that profoundly shapes how the public perceives all of this.
That's right.
So now we examine the controversies surrounding Fox News, detailing how the network is characterized and what internal documents reveal about the priorities driving its content decisions.
Our sources emphasize that the U.S. media landscape is not monolithic. Studies describe the American system as having two structurally different parts, one of which is the right-wing ecosystem, which is highly insular and anchored by Fox News.
And critics are pretty blunt about it.
They are. They state that Fox shares little but a few visual trappings with the world of professional journalism, often acting as America's leading propaganda outlet.
This characterization isn't limited to one political side either. Can you recount some of the descriptions from various political and media figures?
The descriptions are highly consistent across the board. Former DNC Chairman Howard Dean called it a right-wing propaganda machine. CNN's Larry King described it as a Republican brand, an extension of the Republican Party.
And even some conservatives have a similar view.
Yes. Even conservative commentator Jonah Goldberg characterized it as less ideological conservatism and more a populist, tabloid-like network. So the consensus among these observers, regardless of their own politics, is that the network operates with a clear political agenda.
Let's move beyond the general characterizations and look at specific evidence of content bias provided in the sources, particularly when it comes to objective science.
The data on climate science coverage is particularly stark. One report, based on a period in 2012, found that 93% of global warming coverage about Fox News was misleading,
93%.
compared to 81% for the Wall Street Journal. A separate study looking at a later period in 2013 found that 69% of guests and 75% of mentions on the network cast doubt on climate science, figures which the network has publicly disputed.
And this is in direct opposition to the scientific consensus.
Direct opposition. The analysis notes that 97% of climate science experts worldwide hold the consensus view of human-caused global warming.
And this apparent content bias has been linked in surveys to concrete deficiencies in viewer knowledge. This is a critical point for understanding the ecosystem.
It is. The surveys demonstrate a direct correlation between media consumption and accurate information. A 2011 Kaiser Family Foundation survey found that Fox News viewers had a poor understanding of the Affordable Care Act and were more likely to believe falsehoods, specifically that debunked death panel myth.
And there was another study from Fairleigh Dickinson University.
Even more strikingly, yes. A 2011 study found that Fox News viewers in New Jersey were less well-informed than people who did not watch any news at all on certain objective, rapidly changing topics.
So the news they were receiving was actively misleading them.
The study suggested it was either misleading or distracting them from the factual reality.
Beyond the external studies, the sources detail internal mechanisms of editorial control, specifically these daily memos.
Yes, the daily memos issued by executives like Vice President of News John Moody. These were crucial internal documents. Former employees and critics claim these memos served as talking points, instructing us what the themes are supposed to be, and God help you if you stray.
So a top-down narrative.
A deep level of centralized editorial control exerted over the network's daily reporting, which critics argue just blurs the line entirely between objective news presentation and opinion programming.
And now we arrive at the high-stakes legal consequences that really cracked open this internal decision-making process, the Dominion voting system's defamation lawsuit.
Right, regarding the false claims about the 2020 election.
What was the central tension revealed in the private communications that were unearthed during discovery?
The sources reveal this profound conflict between professional journalism on one hand and corporate profitability on the other. The evidence showed, unequivocally, that privately, the Fox hosts and the senior executives, including Rupert Murdoch and CEO Suzanne Scott, they knew the election fraud allegations were false. They called them crazy or insane in their private messages.
Yet they continued to report them publicly. Why?
The internal communications gave the explicit answer: fear of losing their audience and consequently losing revenue.
So it was a business decision.
A core business decision. Executives were concerned that if they pushed back against the falsehoods, their viewers would be alienated and switch to smaller, even more partisan rival networks like Newsmax and OANN. Broadcasting known falsehoods was a choice driven by the desire to maintain corporate profitability and market share.
The sources detail some specific damning internal communications. Can you provide an example that highlights this conflict?
One of the most telling examples involved Tucker Carlson. Texts revealed him privately mocking Trump advisors like Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell. He texted a colleague that Powell was lying, by the way. I caught her. It's insane.
But at the same time,
At the same time, he was expressing concern that our viewers are good people and they believe it. And what's more, the communications showed him pressuring a Fox executive to fire a reporter, Jockey Heinrich, for the simple act of fact-checking these false claims.
he wanted a reporter fired for doing her job.
And he explicitly cited the negative impact on the company's stock price, stating it needs to stop immediately. Like tonight, it's measurably hurting the company. The stock price is down, not a joke.
That evidence linking factual reporting directly to a drop in stock price and demanding a journalist be fired for it is a powerful illustration of the network's priorities.
It's all there in black and white.
So what was the ultimate consequence of this proven misconduct?
The accountability was severe, and it was financial. The case settled for $787.5 million, an absolutely monumental figure in defamation law.
And the sources note that this settlement served as a concrete, tangible measure of accountability.
Yes, underscoring the dangers of allowing an advocacy media model, when it's prioritized over independent journalism, to operate fully unchecked.
We can conclude our look at accountability by focusing on a specific, personal legal consequence for one of the central figures involved in disseminating these election falsehoods, the disbarment of Rudy Giuliani.
This moves the consequence from the corporate level right down to the individual.
And it serves as a clear example of the legal system imposing professional ruin for actions tied to those election challenges.
Exactly. A New York appeals court decided to disbar Rudy Giuliani immediately from practicing law in the state, after finding he spread demonstrable falsehoods about the integrity of the 2020 election.
What were the court's precise findings regarding the nature of his conduct?
The court's conclusion was scathing. They found that 16 proven falsehoods perpetuated by Giuliani, quote, were deliberate and constituted a transparent pattern of conduct intended and designed to deceive. The court stressed that the seriousness of respondents' misconduct cannot be overstated.
So they saw a clear pattern of deception.
A pattern of misusing his position as the personal attorney for the former president, repeatedly and intentionally making false statements, some of which were determined to be perjurious to the federal court, to state lawmakers, and to the public.
And the court explicitly addressed his attitude regarding these findings, which speaks to his lack of credibility moving forward.
It does. The court noted that Giuliani actively contributed to the national strife that has followed the 2020 presidential election, for which he is entirely unrepentant. He had tried to claim he didn't know the statements were false, that he had a good faith basis for the allegations.
The court didn't buy it.
The court completely dismissed it, concluding the claims were baseless and willfully deceptive.
Can you remind us of some of the specific baseless claims that formed the basis of that decision?
Certainly. The falsehoods cited included the claim that illegal voters were brought from New Jersey to vote in Philadelphia, the claim that trucks delivered ballots in paper bags and trash receptacles in Michigan, and the baseless assertion that thousands of votes were cast by dead people in Georgia.
These were specific claims aggressively pushed by Giuliani, and determined to be deliberate lies.
Yes, deliberate lies intended to undermine the electoral process.
And the disbarment is only one piece of the legal fallout he's facing.
That's right. The total legal consequence is massive. In addition to losing his ability to practice law in the state where he was admitted back in 1969, a professional endpoint for a man who served as a top federal prosecutor and mayor.
There was also the defamation judgment.
A staggering $148 million judgment for defaming two former election workers in Georgia. This forced him to file for bankruptcy. And he's also facing pending state criminal charges in both Fulton County, Georgia, and Arizona, stemming from the alleged plot to overturn the election results there.
So this serves as a potent example that while political actors may seek legal insulation or operational control, the systems of professional and criminal accountability can still deliver severe, tangible consequences when established legal lines are crossed.
It connects back perfectly. The legal system, even as it grants this broad immunity to the institution of the presidency, is simultaneously imposing massive financial and professional penalties on individuals whose actions are judged to have willfully corrupted the political and legal processes.
So let's synthesize these three major threads, the consolidation of power, the strategic ambition, and the concrete accountability, into a final picture for our listener.
What emerges is, I think, a profound tension playing out across the entire U.S. governing structure. On one hand, you have foundational legal interpretations, like the Trump v. United States ruling, that are actively creating greater insulation and protection for presidential action. They're reinforcing this concept of presidential exceptionalism.
And at the same time, you have strategic organizations like Project 2025 capitalizing on that legal trend.
Exactly. Offering a detailed blueprint, which is anchored in the unitary executive theory and the purging of the civil service, to fundamentally centralize political control over the entire government bureaucracy.
And running parallel to this centralization is a system of checks that's facing severe internal and external challenges. The judiciary is under unprecedented scrutiny for its own lack of ethical oversight.
And yet, and this is the critical part, the information and legal ecosystem is still capable of imposing brutal, tangible accountability. We see multi-million-dollar settlements for media companies driven by commercial fears and professional ruin, characterized by disbarment and bankruptcy, for individuals found by courts to have spread deliberate, perjurious falsehoods.
So the battle isn't just over policy, it's over the very structure of power itself.
It's about who gets to decide which actions are immune, and who gets to hold the decision-makers accountable when the systems designed for that oversight become highly politicized. The sources we've reviewed show a system where the ambition for centralized power is immense, but the consequences for abusing that power are still being actively and very expensively defined.
The fundamental tension we've observed, then, is between the constitutional grants of power, the strategic ambition to centralize that power, often justified by ideas like the unitary executive theory, and the ultimate question of who enforces the rule of law when the systems of accountability become so highly politicized. This deep dive leaves us asking, in a world where foundational legal and governmental checks are being rigorously redefined, what level of accountability is truly required to sustain public trust in democratic institutions?
A question we have to keep asking.
If you found value in this deep dive, please remember to subscribe, like, and comment, and let us know what critical information you are seeing in your sources.
Thank you for joining us.
And thank you for listening to VSOW.